It was a little graveyard on the rolling foothill plains that was blanched by the sun in summer, swept by summer winds and snows and rains. There was a little bunch of settlers gathered on an autumn day and round a homemade lumber coffin with their last respects to pay. Weary men that wrung their living from the hard and arid land, and beside them stood their women, faded wives and toil-worn hands. But among us stood one figure that was wiry, straight, and trim, and everyone he knew of him as 'twas Bronco Twister Jim. Just a bunch of hardened muscle, tempered with a savage grit, and he had the reputation of a man that would never quit. He had helped to build the coffin, and he'd helped to dig the grave, and his instincts seemed to teach him that how he really should behave. Well, we don't have a preacher, and the crowd was mighty slim, and two women with weak voices sang an old-time funeral hymn. That was what we had for service. The old wife was sobbing there, for her husband of a long time laid away without a prayer. She looked at Bronco Twister, and she walked right up to him and put one trembling arm around him and said, "Pray, please won't you, Jim?" You could see his figure straighten, and he'd look of quite surprise flashed across his swarthy features and his hard, dark, deviled eyes. He could handle any bronco, and he never dodged a fight, and 'twas the first time anybody ever saw his face turn white. But he took off his big sombrero off his rough and shaggy head, and wished I could remember what that bronco peeler said. No, he wasn't educated, and on the stage his youth was spent, but the maker of creation exactly knew what he meant. He crawled toward the mountains where the drifting shadows played, and silence must have reigned in heaven when they heard Jim played. Years have passed since that small funeral in that lonely graveyard lot, but it gave us all a memory and a lot of food for thought. And as we stood beside the coffin and the freshly broken sod, with the breast reckless bronco breaker taking heart and hold of God, when the prayer at last he was over and the grave had been filled, and of his rough half-broken pony he rode off toward the hills. Yes, he stood there in amazement as we watched him ride away, and for no words could ever thank him. There was nothing that we could say. Since we gathered in the graveyard, it's been nearly 50 years, with their joys and with their sorrows, with their hopes and with their fears. But I hope when I have finished and they lay me with the dead, someone says a prayer above me, like the Bronco Twister said.